Okay, so I would ask that all the speakers come up, and we'll have about 15 minutes for questions, I think. And so we'll have the same format as last time. Raise your hand if you have questions. Also, I'm no demographer, but I did want to point out that maybe the distribution of question askers doesn't reflect the distribution of people in the room. So let's make sure we give lots of different people a chance to ask their questions, and also try to do it succinctly too. So,
Thank you. Carol Jagger. So I've got a question for Patrick. Thank you for being reasonably complimentary about the minimum European health modules. I was one of the people who put it together. But I was slightly worried about you trying to put the three measures together. I agree self-rated health isn't perfect. But it's already a composite, probably, of the other two measures. And I wonder if we'd be better employed trying to understand what people bring to that rating, that self-rated health rating. Because I suspect in putting in the other two things, measures, you're just adding what is already implicitly in there that people are bringing to that rating. And the reason for having those three measures as they were was because of the health expectancies that you can calculate from them. And, you know, when you put them together and you don't really have a binary or ordinal metric, you can't really calculate health expectancy after that. But good try.
Yeah, thank you. The rationale is that self-rated health, if you want to use it as a generic health measurement, to me is too subjective, and I want to sort of give it a bit more standardization without losing all the subjective information, which I think is also very relevant. But as I've seen in my dissertation, there are some biases in it, and it's not really the same in every age group, and I want to sort of get around this problem by sort of emphasizing these, like you said, two very important aspects of self-rated health in the new measurement. But yeah, I think we'll take a closer look and see what it brings. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniela Negrae from the Max Planck Institute of Demographic Research in Rostock, and I have a question for Anastasia. First, I want to say thank you that you're doing cross-cultural research, and I think that's a path that maybe more of us should think about it, because we develop measures in the Western world, particularly the Northern Hemisphere, and then we apply those to developing countries, and we don't really know what we're doing. So my question to you is, for your last slide, you said that in Mexico, about 60% of the population reported a certain level of happiness, but you found much more life satisfaction. What is your interpretation of this? That people in Mexico are not happy, or that maybe we shouldn't use a happiness measure in Mexico because that's not something that culturally people would be comfortable answering to. So maybe that's not something that people from a normative perspective say in their daily life. As for example, in the US, as part of the Constitution, you know, pursuit of happiness. But for example, I'm from Romania, and we never talk about happiness. That's something you do on your marriage day, but that's it. No one is asking how happy you are. That's shallow, that's superficial. We just don't talk about that. So I want to know your perspective on this. And then I have one brief question for Bernard. Your talk made me think about places where people live a long time and where they're pretty short, so Japan and southern Italy, and I wonder what are the differences that we're talking about? So if you're low socioeconomic status when you're growing up, would that be a difference of 1 centimeter or 10 centimeters compared to someone who is of high socioeconomic status? And also, how do you establish the baseline? So what's your potential of growth from your genetic package that you come from your parents with? How do you know which one is which? Thank you.
Thank you for comment and compliments for the cross-cultural study that I did. It's still very preliminary. I'm sure with the help of my colleagues later on, I hope to develop it more. more to maybe involve different countries. However, I think it's very spot on when you mention particular difference in Mexico in life satisfaction to happiness. Again, as you share your own experience in Romania, I believe that each culture has their own understanding what is happiness. In my own country, for example, Indonesia, we don't actually show so much when we are so happy because we don't want to make other people around us feel jealous or uncomfortable. But we will be very modest in that. So we tend to, I think, report it lower in that sense. And I believe that in the Southern Hemisphere, this is quite common. But I also, for example, can point out in African Ubuntu values and in Japanese, for example, this feeling of hedonic, more into hedonic emotions are tend to be more repressed. But for example, if you ask about life satisfaction, people are really is an overarching life evaluation of what you achieved so far. Not so much on, I gained weight, so if you ask me if I'm happy, I will never say I'm happy because I'm still considered I'm overweight. But if I'm satisfied with my life, yes, of course. Now I'm in Austria, for example. Thank you.
Can you hear? I'll take the questions in a slightly different order if I can. So, at an individual level, height plays a role in, or growth monitoring plays a role in screening or in measuring child health. So essentially the way that works is, certainly in a country like Britain anyway, when your child is born, you get these growth charts and they sort of tell you where on the distribution of heights your child is at the time they're first measured. And then if they maintain their growth along the same trajectory of that sort of central distribution, then that's seen as normal growth. If they fall off their growth curves, then that's seen as a health risk. So what's that got to do with populations? So the assumption in the literature, I suppose, is that if you take large numbers of people, then other things being equal, you would expect both the mean height and the distribution of heights across populations to be fairly similar. If you have populations where the heights are significantly different, then that's telling you something about the certain differences in the circumstances under which those populations live. What do you then do about the cases you're selecting of sort of short populations where they are in other respects healthy? So obviously there is the issue of how far there are genetic differences between populations. I have a kind of ideological reservation about that, but it's probable there is going to be some variation, and that variation will become more important. That variation will become more important over time as the socioeconomic components of variation might become less important. But even within the populations you're quoting, if you take the Japanese population, for example, then the increase in height in Japan between the end of the Second World War and the start of the 1980s was enormous, around about 8.4 centimetres in average male height at age 18. So even within a population which might appear short by international standards, there has been a major change which reflects changes in circumstances.
A question in the back there and one over here.
Working? Thank you. My name is Max Haller. I'm a sociologist from the University of Graz and a member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. I've also done work on happiness and life satisfaction using the World Value Survey. And I'd like to go on with what the lady said before, of Anastasia, Lijadi, about intercultural comparisons. I think we understand quite well at the individual level what is the determinant of happiness, quite evident, good education, good health and so on. But at the macro level, we have much less understanding of it, and we need some more explanation of that. I found that in the macro perspective, there are significant differences between countries, and if you look at the relation between level of, say, GDP per head or level of income in a country and happiness, it's not a linear relation. There are some countries which are outliers. Latin America is an outlier. There is more happiness than it would correspond to the level of income. And here, I think the quality and intensity of social network is the most decisive factor. Then you have all post-communist countries where it's much lower. happiness. From Hungary up to Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. And here the reason is certainly it was a very fast, shocking transition for the population, connect many negative experiences. But then you have also political dimension, the level of welfare state. This explains in part the high level of happiness in all Scandinavian countries, but also the political situation. Yes, I mentioned this. And the last, maybe there are also cultural and national peculiarities. If you look at the American literature and Russian literature, American literature is full of optimism, Russian literature is full of tragic stories, poems and so on. They are very pessimistic. So this might be your idea that people look for different kinds of happiness. I doubt if that's true. I think they look for the same happiness everywhere in the world, but the conditions are very different. So to conclude, I would, Wolfgang Lutz has mentioned open questions, important questions for future research. I would add to your list to have good measures, to have long time series, that's certainly important. Also to have a good theoretical base, a theory first regarding the explanation of happiness at individual and macro levels, sociological, economic, psychological theories. But we need also normative discussions, because happiness is also a normative concept. It's closely related with utilitarianism. If you mentioned it in other cultures, in Buddhism, in Catholic doctrine, very different times are important in life than happiness. And the last point is we need also more interdisciplinary research, going from psychology to history to even the literature and so on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very nice comment and definitely very good input. I will come back to you and ask for all the literature that you mentioned, and hopefully we can improve our paper.
All right, so we have time for one last quick question.
Okay, thank you very much for all the presenters. My question is to Anna. It's about the Years of Good Life Index. Meanwhile, I'm Hilal from Hacettepe University. I always forget to tell. I think what is the challenging, and also Wolfgang also mentioned about these difficulties to determine the constituents and determinants of Years of Good Life Index. And my question is regarding about how this index would be the sensitive to inequality. Because I know that you are aware of it and you want to calculate this measure at the group level and differentiate across groups, and you also talk about the difficulties to find the data at group level by giving example of age and gender. But I think the challenge starts at the beginning, like to find the gender sensitive measures to make the index. And also another challenge is related with how this Years of Good Life Index would take into account intersectional inequalities. So if it is a competitor of Human Development Index, if this index, maybe you will produce like inequality adjusted Years of Good Life Index or what. So I think that's the challenge, and could you give please give a little bit information about this.
Yes, so thank you for your question. Well, in fact, the way that we construct the index, it's concerned with, as Wolfgang mentioned, it's concerned with the outcome, measuring the well-being of a person. I think inequality fits more on the other side of the equation. So later on, once we have constructed data for as many countries and time periods as possible, we can then see how inequality affects well-being, but this will only come up in a later stage. In terms of taking into account gender dimension, and I think this also is similar to what I mentioned about taking into account the situation of children, or basically conditions at different ages and gender, which might be important for determining well-being. I think this is very important. We're still discussing the measures which would be most appropriate, and as I demonstrated, there are ways to integrate, particularly in the poverty dimension, looking into adding or looking more more specifically into measures that relate to the situation of certain people. For example, with measuring poverty, some have suggested that one should look into the body mass index, for example, something that relates to the presentation we saw earlier, because then we can see that in households that would normally be considered not poor, that women would quite often appear to have a low body mass index, so they would in fact be poor within a non-poor household, but that would not be reflected if you only look at the household situation, the way that a lot of poverty measures do. So that I agree is very, very important. Yeah. Thank you for your comments.
All right, I think that's all our time, so thanks for the speakers and the questioners.